And welcome into the state of purple. It's a much different state than it was last week. Not quite as good and golden feeling as it was 1 week ago. I'm Aj Mansour. He's Jack Day. Jack, how are you, man?
I'm doing well. I didn't sleep the best last night after that loss. Not because of that. I was just wide awake, not necessarily thinking about the game, but it left a lot different taste in my mouth than the previous week. So it was, I don't know. I'm trying to look for the best way to explain it, but
Jack, you don't have to deny it. You know you couldn't sleep because you were canceling your trip to the Super Bowl and you were worried about non-refundable, fees that come with Super Bowl tickets that you had purchased after the Week 1 victory. It's okay. I mean, you're not the only one. This is a Vikings fans thing. This is what we do. But yes, yuck. That's pretty much all we can say about that. Before we get in to the venting, thank you for the live audience today as well. We are streaming this one live. If you want to sound off and let us know what you thought about the game, throw a comment in the comment feed and we'll throw you up on the screen and talk about what you're feeling. But before we get too far, Jack, I do want to say thank you to our sponsors, SodaStick and sodastick.com. They had a special shirt for coming out over this weekend. The Missed Kicks factor, I guess that didn't factor in with their T-shirt this weekend. But you can always get Minnesota sports inspired goods at sodastick.com, and you can take 15% off with the promo code KFAN. So head over to sodastick.com right now, throw that promo code KFAN in there, and take 15% off your order. Thank you for SodaStick for believing in the state of purple and believing in the Minnesota Vikings. I can't tell if companies like SodaStick, if shows like KFAN do better when the team melts down like they did last night, Jack, or better when they're doing amazing things and rocking and rolling.
Yeah, I think for our purposes, usually it seems like it brings out more people that want to at least talk about things, and
Right.
it's very obvious. I'm sure if you're a Vikings fan, you've been on Twitter, and it's clear as day. There's people that are already saying the narratives. I mean, it's hard not to with the game that Kirk Cousins had. I don't think the game is fully on the shoulders of Kirk Cousins, but it certainly doesn't help the primetime narrative that comes with his name because
No.
like I said, it doesn't completely fall on his shoulders, but some of the decision making that he had last night, I've stuck up for Kirk Cousins when I've felt that was warranted, but I think a lot of the blame can go on the shoulders of Kirk Cousins. I know Kevin O'Connell came after during his press conference and he said all the right things because that's what head coaches do. But he said, you know what, I'm going to put this one on myself. I think you can go back and watch the game and you can see that the game plan, it wasn't good enough. But at the end of the day, Kirk Cousins was atrocious against the blitz. And that's not necessarily – it's not a stat that we expect Kirk Cousins to excel at per se, but it was particularly bad last night. He was missing guys downfield that were open in some check down situations. Kind of all these narratives that have followed along with Kirk Cousins came to fruition last night. And then hucking the ball up to Justin Jefferson on back-to-back plays after
Right.
Darius Slay almost intercepted him and then did intercept him the following. It didn't seem characteristic for Kirk Cousins to make mistakes like that. And I don't know. The Vikings are still 1-1. It was you and I kind of both predicted the Vikings to win that game. But I think if you're a Vikings fan and you look at this schedule at the beginning of the year and you say the Vikings start the season out 1-1, I think you're sitting in a pretty good place if you know that's the case prior to the season kicking off.
Right. That might be the only thing you can take out of this game and feel good about, right, is the fact that through 2 games against the Packers and the Eagles are a team that was like a preseason darlings, right? I mean, this is a team that people thought was going to be really good. That they're 1-1, that's kind of the only thing that you can take good out of this game. Punting was great, I guess. Field goal kicking didn't miss. There wasn't any of that. He had some new little pop-up kickoffs, like that was good stuff. But at the end of the day, if your defense underperforms and your offense underperforms, everybody's going to be angry. And we go from week 1 where people had some questions maybe about the Philadelphia Eagles. They give up a lot of points to the Lions. Maybe the Lions are a little more real than we thought, and we're going to see them next week. But you go from thinking that the Eagles might not be as good as maybe people thought to the Vikings might be better than people thought. And then that completely flips its script. Now, I don't know, Jack. I don't think that this game was requisite of like exactly how these teams are going to play out the rest of the season, right? Philadelphia played about a perfect half of football. The second half, they didn't do much, right? I don't think that there was no points in the second half of that football game. But everything slowed down a little bit. They had turnovers, issues there, blocked field goal, the situations that they're going to want to work on as well. But they played a perfect half of football. The first half of that game, scoring 21 points and then squeezing another 3 out of the end. They executed it perfectly. They showed what they can do, not what they're going to do every game. And we showed, hopefully, what we won't do every game. You mentioned Kirk Cousins. I want to pull this up real quick. Arguably one of the worst games of his career. Statistically, maybe not. If you go by quarterback, passer rating, whatever you want to call it, he was a 51.1 yesterday, 27 for 46 with 221 yards, 1 touchdown, 3 interceptions. He has had 4 games, Jack, that are worse than that game last night. He had a 15.9 quarterback rating. Do you remember that game? He was 11 for 26, 113 yards, and 3 interceptions, 0 touchdowns against the Indianapolis Colts. Way back in 2020, not too far ago.
I do remember that, and that's kind of a recurring thing that I've seen on Twitter as well, is the blow-up games with Kirk Cousins are there.
They're
and
epic.
Yeah, it's not like he goes out and he throws an interception and the next drive he comes on the field. I mean, it blew up in his face last night, and you could tell. I mean, it's pretty. I think he's one of those quarterbacks where you can tell when the other team is. I don't know if in his head is the right words that I'm looking for, but he seemed frantic in the pocket after a week ago where he was kind of moving around a little bit against Green Bay. And hats off to that Philly defense as well, because going into the season, all the rave reviews were about the Packers defense. And I still think the Packers defense is going to get things figured out, and I think they're going to be good. But the Eagles did, this is kind of flipping the script, that the Eagles did to the Vikings last night what the Vikings did to the Packers a week ago. They completely had wide receivers wide open all over the place. It didn't seem like they were stuck on anyone in coverage. And flipping it back to the defensive side of the ball, Darius Slay was all over Justin Jefferson. I think he got away with an early holding or pass interference, whatever that hand holding situation would have been, but it didn't look good. And it just seemed like Kirk Cousins was so focused on trying to feed the ball to Justin Jefferson. And I couldn't completely tell if that's a game plan thing or if that was just Kirk Cousins trying to rely on the best wide receiver, the best playmaker on the field. But we talked about your MVP pick for this team to have success this season was Adam Thielen. Right. I believe he led the team in receiving yards, but that was all garbage time receiving yards. He was non-existent last night. Delvin Cook, one of the best running backs in the league. Kirk Cousins outrushed Delvin Cook last night. That cannot happen. I said going into this game, if the Vikings are going to win this game, they need a big day from Delvin Cook. They got the opposite, and they actually game planned for the opposite as well after DeAndre Swift completely gashed them a week ago, and that was confusing to me. He had 6 carries last night. I don't have the box score in front of me. I think it was 6 carries or something like that for like 17 yards. It was
6 for 17.
Not an ideal game for the Vikings offense. And like I said, I think you can put a lot of the blame on Kirk Cousins, but there was really nothing clicking for this team last night.
No, I would equate it to when you have a cold, right? When you're sick, you're not like down and out completely, can't do anything, but you have a cold, you got the shivers, you got a fever, you're just not feeling yourself. You feel like you're in a fog. You can't perform, you can't focus, you can't do these things. That's what it looked like the entire team was under yesterday. This cold, situation where they were all lethargic. Nobody seemed engaged, and that's hard for us to say on TV watching them from a million miles away, but you never saw anybody get in anybody's face. There was never any tenacity that showed itself on the football field. All we saw was lazy passes, lazy routes, lazy angles, lazy defensive efforts. And it was top to bottom. I mean, it was basically the entire team. Now, they're withholding some opportunities where some guys did get to stand out and do some things. This was basically the entire team just not waking up for the game. That's what it felt like. And I don't know what goes into that. If it's a Monday night, if it's obviously there's a road game, there's the mystique of playing in Philly and, all these things that you should just be able to get over because you're a professional. It felt like a completely different team, right? Everything from the week one where you're rolling, your momentum, you feel this, they're having fun, they're doing things. I'm going to pull up a comment here. Actually, Nick Scholes is in the chat right now. He was wondering about all the pre-snap shifts. I mean, we didn't see any of the same game plan. We didn't see any of the same game efforts. It was just a weird situation that felt like it was two different football teams.
Yeah, and it seemed like they were doing a lot more just straight dropbacks for Kirk Cousins too, which we know play action is what Kirk Cousins thrives in. And I mean, I guess it's hard to establish any run or a threat of play action if you're only having Dalvin Cook carry the ball 6 times for 17 yards. But this game is exactly what I was fearful about for the Green Bay game with the lack of the preseason reps. It seemed like that is what happened after a week where they looked like they were clearly the better physical, the faster, just the better schemed team all around against the Green Bay Packers. That completely all went out the window last night. And I don't know how that happened. It seems really weird. And you'd think, I agree with what you were saying. It just kind of seemed like they were dragging their feet a little bit. And I don't know if it's, I mean, obviously it's a lot easier to get yourself juiced up a little bit in front of a home crowd, but don't you want guys on your team that are going to want to go play in hostile environments? I mean, Patrick Mahomes isn't going to go into Philadelphia and just back down because the fans are scary and he has pressure in his face. That doesn't happen if you're an elite quarterback, if you're an elite team. And I'm not saying the Vikings can't be that. I like I said, they're 1-1. I think that's a solid start given the first two teams that they had on their schedule. But we're going to learn a lot about this team in the next couple weeks because there's some very winnable football games in the foreseeable future for them. And if they come out and lay a dud at home against a much improved Detroit Lions team, I think fans will be warranted to start panicking a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, before we switch over to the defense, because there's a lot to talk about on the defensive side of the football as well, I want to talk about, I got a couple more things on the offensive side. Justin Jefferson, didn't have a terrible game, but 12 targets, 6 catches. I think he ended up with 48 yards. It seemed like Kirk was trying to force the ball to him. Just wasn't working. I don't know if it was the defense, if it was the routes. I will go ahead and say it seemed like it was more errors that the Vikings were making than it was that the defense was playing great. Bad throws, lazy throws, underthrows, a miscommunication between Kirk and Justin on that the first interception. That kind of turns out it looks like it was Justin's fault because he didn't go in front of the cornerback there. He was just not the same Justin Jefferson, this week either. You have Dalvin who was disappearing. It was good on one hand to see Irv Smith involved in the offense. There's high hopes for this team when it comes to that tight end, involving any tight end. You have him lost for injury last year. He comes back this year, doesn't play a whole lot in the preseason. Those targeted 8 times, 5 catches, 36 yards. He did get that touchdown, but there was the one, the deep, perfect pass from Kirk to Irv through the void in the zone defense. The cornerback lets him go. The safety's not quite there. Kirk delivered a perfect pass. And I don't know if it was just the vision of the safety flashing past him, if he thought that the ball was going to get tipped or whatever it was, but it went right in the breadbasket for Irv, and it would have been an easy touchdown. That was one of those plays that didn't necessarily lose the game for the Vikings, but certainly would have shifted the momentum. Felt like it was more back in. I think it was 14-7 at that point, or I don't know. It might have been 21-7.
It might have been 21-7.
Get them back in the game right before the half. You have that opportunity to do something big, and it couldn't. I think there was like 2 minutes left in the half even. Was that the final drive for the Vikings?
I believe so. And then following that, I think this is something that needs to be brought up as well. The 2-minute drive situation on defense again. I don't want to bring that up again after I know we talked about that.
Let's switch over to the defense. Do you have any final thoughts on Irv before we get over there?
I don't think so. I will say I think Irv is going to be okay. There's a lot of people saying bust. I saw that already on Twitter. The guy hasn't played football in a year and a half, 2 years.
It still feels like he's shaking out the rust.
Yes, which is fair. He hasn't. I think that's kind of why we have seen a little bit more of Johnny Munt. I'm sure the coaching staff is aware that he needs to kind of get picked up again with football activities and just getting back into the rhythm of things, football speed. It's tough. It's not easy to sit out for, I think it was almost 2 full seasons that he hasn't played now for the most part. Maybe it wasn't, or a season and a half, but he's knocking off the rust. I don't expect him to be making regular drops like that moving forward. Hopefully that is going to be the case. But he did have a solid game outside of the drop, but that drop was, I think you can make the argument that was the turning point for this game.
Right. Yeah, for sure. One of them. We'll talk about another one a little bit later, I'm sure. Let's flip over to that defense then. Okay. We'll talk about that 2-minute drive. I want to talk also about how, for some reason, a lot of guys got right against the Minnesota Vikings defense yesterday. Miles Sanders hasn't had a great stellar career, has underperformed largely. He had a good game. Devontae Smith had a disappointing season last year, disappointing game last week. He got right with 80 yards yesterday. Even Dallas Goedert had 82 yards. I think he was the leading wide receiver, or leading receiver, I should say, for the Eagles. But this defense, there was no pressure on the quarterback. There was no guarding of the receivers, and they couldn't contain Jalen Hurts. I mean, I don't know, and I'm not trying to be too negative here, but was there something that they did good that I just missed? It seemed like everything kind of seemed to go wrong. They buckled down in the second half, right? Maybe that's what we can say.
Yeah, I mean, they buckled down and they forced a turnover that was another turning point that
Right.
should have been turning point until I think Kirk came back and threw another pick after that, I believe. I think there's a couple positives. Cameron Dantzler, he looks like one of the only players that's last night that was there to play football. He was tackling. We've kind of talked about that a couple times on the show where his tackling has been impressive. I thought it was kind of cool to see a Caleb Evans get some snaps as well. I'm not saying good or bad. I don't necessarily remember if he was in the majority of some of these bigger plays or not, but I did hear in Kevin O'Connell's press conference after the game, he said that was designed, and they feel that a Caleb Evans has earned the right to be on the field a little bit. And I think that speaks volumes for a 4th-round rookie that they were very, very high on. But other than that, there wasn't a whole lot of good things. And I think, I mean, this speaks volumes about the state of this game. Jalen Hurts is now 3rd behind Patrick Mahomes, or it's either one. I don't know if it's Mahomes or Josh Allen, but Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes are 1 and 2 in the MVP race. Jalen Hurts jumped all the way up to 3rd because he had a Michael Vick type game against the Minnesota Vikings. And obviously Vikings fans don't want to hear that name either because he's tormented them in years past. But that's what he did. He killed the Vikings with his legs. He looked like he looked like one of the best passing quarterbacks in the league against this defense too. And I think that shows the scheme that Philly had against the Vikings last night. They had their wide receivers wide open. You just brought up Devonta Smith. He didn't have a catch last week. He had like four or five targets, and he was held catchless against Detroit. He looked like a 1st-round pick last night against the Vikings. He was wide open. I'm not necessarily saying that I couldn't see in some of the coverages. It just seemed like they were playing a lot different styles too. They weren't being aggressive. And I do think it's harder to play an aggressive defense, like throwing blitz packages, when you're going up against a Jalen Hurts type quarterback. There were certain plays where it seemed like Eric Kendricks was fingertips or footsteps away from making a huge play, but he just wasn't quite there. Harrison Smith goes out with a concussion. I think this was a disastrous performance first half wise for the defense. They kind of got right in the second half, but at that point it was too late because the offense just couldn't get things going either.
Yeah, and then there's a couple concerns too, right? Harrison Smith came down with a concussion yesterday. The coach confirmed that after the game. Short week for the Minnesota Vikings. They're going to see if they can get him back out there or not. But in a game where you don't really feel great about your secondary, you don't feel great about the back end and what it looks, you're going to maybe be without your leader if that concussion protocol is delayed for any sense. And there's steps to that, right? You got to feel better. You got to pass the baselines. You got to get back out there, and then you got to take a break and see if you have any symptoms before you can get back out there as well. So that'll be an interesting thing right there. Jacob in the chat is commenting on that, how the secondary got burned a lot last night. That was a common theme in it. When we look at the schedule going forward, we've got some good teams on this schedule. There's a Miami game. They have a high-flying offense. There is a Buffalo game. There is another Packer game with Aaron Rodgers getting right. There's a lot of good passing quarterbacks that we will see down the road for this Minnesota Vikings team. They need to figure that out. We've talked in past episodes of this podcast, Jack, about how they don't have a whole lot of depth on the back end of this defense. So they need to do what they can do with the players that they have. And right now, specifically, when you have a mobile quarterback, and not every quarterback is mobile. Jalen is probably on the upper half of being mobile, or the upper side of being mobile even, where he can get designed runs, those run-pass options, where the pass option is really just a quarterback run option kind of a thing, where he takes it and bootlegs out to the other side. I mean, that's going to be a detriment for many NFL teams, but it seems to really hit the Minnesota Vikings hard. And I don't know if that is just the personnel we have, and they're falling for it. They're not, being, paying attention to it, or if they are, if this is just something that is going to get this scheme. We don't know this scheme yet, right? This 3-4 defense, we don't know what it's going to look like yet. So there's still some question marks, and it may not get easier next week with the Lions.
Yeah, I do have a question going back to the secondary for you as well. Sure. What do you make, and this, again, this could be similar to the Irv Smith situation where they're easing him back because he missed some time throughout the preseason and training camp and last week, obviously. But Josh Metellus got the nod when Harrison Smith went out, not the Vikings' first-round pick, Lewis Seen. I think it's too early probably to panic about that, but I thought it was interesting. Wanted to get your takes on that.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if, depending on how they want to play, right? You got the two safety positions there. The plan when you draft a guy like that, there's a long-term plan, there's a short-term plan, right? Harrison Smith isn't going to be here forever. Is there, I would have to imagine part of their hope was that Lewis would be playing next to Harrison Smith, and have that opportunity there. I think that put the concussion to the side, right? And you can't really do that, but for long term, I think that's the plan. So if they're hoping to get him slow roll back into that spot opposite of Harrison out there, maybe they don't want to put him in that spot. I don't know the learning process behind it or how it's going, but maybe you don't want to confuse him by putting him on that side with those responsibilities. If your plan is, barring the health of Harrison Smith, to put him as early as next week, given the performance of his the incumbent, he might be there opposite Harrison Smith. That's the only thing I can think of. You'd like to think that the talent is there, but maybe it's just you're trying to protect what is there and what is learning and the steps you're taking behind the scenes.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And Cam Bynum, I think he was a part of one of the early mix-ups in coverage. I don't know. I think if I'm remembering correctly, it seemed like Cam Dancer carried and then dropped down into the flats. And instead of Bynum following the route, he just cut. Yeah, I don't know what that was after. I think he was.
It looked like he was sniffing an interception or something.
Something like that. And just being over aggressive against an offense with a quarterback like Jalen Hurts, it's going to make you look how the Vikings looked last night. And I kind of want to transition this a little bit because I've been – I wouldn't say fully negative, but I do think, I said this to you before the show, I don't want to come out and say that a loss is a good thing. I think we'd be having a lot more fun conversations today if the Vikings were 2-0 and if they were to find a way to win that game. But I'm excited to see how this team battles through adversity. How is Kevin O'Connell going to hit the film? How is he going to make his team better? He said all the right things. He took the blame for this loss. How does Kevin O'Connell now attack the week? And in years past, I think it would have been pretty safe to say, I shouldn't say in years past because I have some pretty vivid memories of Golden Tate absolutely embarrassing the Vikings in overtime. But it's not the same Detroit Lions that this team is used to seeing. And we learned that throughout Hard Knocks, everyone kind of jumping on the bandwagon. But Jared Goff is spinning the ball. DeAndre Swift, Amon-Ra St. Brown just got my dynasty team like 42 or 43 points this week. So their offense is clicking on all cylinders. They have some talent on defense. Obviously had the second overall pick in Aiden Hutchinson. But I'm really excited to see how this team bounces back. It's going to be back at US Bank Stadium in front of a home crowd. And I think, like I said, it's 1-1 against two of the favorites still probably in the NFC. I think the Vikings have a chance to rebound. And if this team starts 2-1, I think we're going to be having some fun conversations moving forward about this team potentially starting 3-1 or 4-1. And then I know the schedule gets a little bit harder after that. But if you can get to 4-1 over the next 3 games, I think this loss in Philly is going to be forgotten.
Right. Well, let's call this the silver linings portion of the show, right? Because we have been negative, but that doesn't mean we're hating on the team. We're just hating on the performance last night, right? And I don't know how anybody could not be negative or critique what we saw on Monday Night Football last night. So silver linings, Jack, I mean, you're talking about some there. I'll add to the pile there. This was a good football team we played against. The Vikings played against the Eagles. They're supposed to be a good football team. And withstanding two specific situations. We'll get into them in a second. They had opportunities to get back into this game, right? Kirk Cousins is not going to throw 3 interceptions every game, right? You take those away, it's a much different feeling game, even if you're adding field goals and not touchdowns to every single one of those opportunities. You're more in this game, you're more engaged. The butterfly effect changes everything on both sides of the ball. Okay, I'm realistic. I understand that the Eagles would have kept pushing a little harder in the second half had it been a closer game. But you look at that Irv Smith touchdown, potential touchdown, not the one he got, but the one that he dropped that should have been his first touchdown of the night. And you think of what the situation would have been going into the half, the tide's changing a little bit. You're down by 7 points as opposed to being down by what did it end up being, 17 going into the half. You have that situation, and then you go into the third quarter. The end of the third quarter, and the Eagles are lined up for a field goal, 41-yard field goal, average sort of situation. Jake Elliott probably going to go out there and hit it. It gets blocked. Patrick Peterson blocks the field goal, and Chris Boyd, not perfectly in stride, but pretty much in stride, right about midfield, picks up this football. Looks like he's gone. Looks like this is going to be the momentum shift. You've had a horrible first half, not a great third quarter, and Chris Boyd's going to take this thing back to the house. The defense is going to score you a touchdown. They're going to do what the offense couldn't do, and they're going to get you back into this thing. But no. I think is it Aaron Saposo, the punter for the Philadelphia Eagles. He's the holder on the field goal unit. He catches Chris Boyd and tackles him at like the 30-yard line and keeps him out of the end zone. The Vikings go 2 plays, and then on the third play, Kirk Cousins throws an interception. So they get 0 points off of this situation. Now, Jack, I've been going off on Twitter about this situation. This didn't lose them the game, but this could have been one of those situations that shifted momentum and really turned the tides. Chris Boyd in high school was a state record holder in track and field. He was the runner-up in the 100-yard dash in state when he was in high school. He was a state record holder in the relays. He is a fast player, a 4.45 40-yard dash. Where does that fall? You know much more than I do about the draft, the combine. It's on the fast side. How is it really fast? Is it pretty fast?
On the fast side for DBs, I'd say it's probably. I feel like it's almost. I don't want to say average now, but the DBs at the combine, it's not slow. I think slow. The DBs are usually the ones now, and I think we saw a fast wide receiver class last year too. But usually it's the DBs that put on the show, and it's like you see some squeak into the 4.2s and 4.3s, sure. But 4.45 it's not slow. You can't say that,
right? You're not going to drop in draft status because of a 4.45 40. The punter, he's a Aussie rules football player. Arryn, Arryn, cool spelling of the name that I share with him. Arryn Saposo is the punter for the Philadelphia Eagles. He's also the holder. He ran a 5.09 40. Not fast, not super slow, but not fast. But significantly slower than the 4.45. He's also 6'2", 212 pounds. So this is a big man. One would think that the state record holder track and field star who ran a 4.45 would be able to catch a football, even if he had to slow down to pick it up a little bit. Remember, Arryn Saposo was on his knee holding a football, and he had to stand up, get momentum going the other direction, and go to catch him. And he still caught him. Jack. I don't understand how this happened. The math does not work out. It does not equate in my mind. And this was an opportunity that the Vikings had to turn the tides, and they just didn't. It was requisite of the entire night. The things that should go their way didn't go their way, and their play didn't help any of it the rest of the way.
Yeah, and taking that one step further, I don't know how a game with these numbers. The Vikings had 264 yards. Philly had 486. The Vikings had 3 turnovers. Philly had 1. Vikings had 23 minutes and 46 seconds time of possession. Philly had 36-14. I don't know how a game like this can feel as close as it did. And it's quite frankly, it's because of situations like you were just talking about. We had 5, I can count 5 of them, including Kirk's 3 picks. 5 plays that determine the outcome of this game. 5 absolutely critical momentum killers. I mean, the Vikings defense, I know they were getting gashed in the first half, but they kept this team in the game. Patrick Peterson, the blocked kick, Chris Boyd housing that makes it a completely different game. It actually flips the momentum because The Vikings, although a blocked kick, returned to the whatever it was, 40 or 30-yard line in opposing territory, Eagle territory. That, in general, is a huge swing of momentum, scoring or not scoring.
Right.
But then Kirk goes out and throws that interception. It just felt like anytime something went right for this team, the ball is in the air, just perfect throw to Irv Smith Jr. It looks like it's a for sure touchdown. Drops it. They're just momentum killer after momentum killer, and you cannot win. You can win games like that, but you don't win road games against playoff contenders when you kill yourself in the momentum battle that many times. It's too important in the game of football. I know the Eagles, look at the Eagles. They went out and they threw a pretty bad interception that should have also flipped the script of the game. Right. And it didn't. They were able to kind of flip the momentum back and forth pretty regularly for their squad, and it turned out handedly in their favor. So, yeah, it was all around frustrating, but the Chris Boyd thing, I don't know how you're going to get caught by a punter. I really hope this. I don't know if – I know Randy Moss isn't doing Monday night stuff anymore, but – or is he? I could be wrong on that. But I hope to God we can see Chris Boyd on Come On Man, because that
is it him or is it Carter? Did Carter do Come On Man, or was it Moss?
I don't remember who did that. I mean, no, Moss had the You Got Moss bit, but I just
I think Carter was the Come On Man. But I mean, you talk about the situational momentum shifts too, Jack. And I just went back and looked real quick. It felt a lot closer, even though they played so poorly, because there were opportunities, and every single one of them just hit a buzzsaw. All three of those interceptions for Kirk Cousins came pretty deep within Eagles territory. The first one was from the Philadelphia 19-yard line. Okay, so they were in the red zone there. The second one came at the Philadelphia 27-yard line. That was right after the blocked kick, right? So momentum shifts this way to the Vikings and then right back to the Philadelphia Eagles. And then the third and final one, you mentioned it, it came right after the interception that Jalen Hurts threw 3 plays later from the Philadelphia 9-yard line. Kirk Cousins throws his third interception of the night. So 3 interceptions to balls that I'm trying to remember where they were thrown, but were all thrown within the red zone, scoring opportunities for the Minnesota Vikings. And you don't get 3 points out of it. You get 0, and you shift momentum back to the other team. It was just terrible. The timing of what happened and the mistakes that they made, there were mistakes everywhere, but the timing of the big mistakes couldn't have been worse for the Minnesota Vikings.
Yeah, I agree. And what you just said, say Kirk doesn't throw those interceptions and he gets sacked. Also, another thing, Kirk Cousins almost had a disastrous fumble as well that the Vikings luckily recovered, which at that point, I think we were all anticipating the game was over. But the 3 interceptions alone, you want to score touchdowns when you get into the red zone. That's got to be a priority. There's got to be a better scheme from Kevin O'Connell's offense. We have to see more in that area, but 3 field goals, all 3 of those interceptions, that's a 1-score game at the end of the game. It's an 8-score game, completely different feel. Like I said, it was an ass kicking, and it felt as if the Vikings could have been in that, or it felt as if the Vikings could have made a run to win that game. But I agree completely with what you're saying, that every time it felt like, hey, there's a little bit of hope, Philly completely shut that down with a turnover, or the Vikings just not coming through with dropped passes and stuff like that.
So flip that around, right? Everything that could have gone wrong for the Vikings went wrong last night. Every single thing. Bad defense, bad offense, bad timing of turnovers, unfortunate situations, dropped passes. Oh, we haven't talked about drop passes. Tons of drop passes. All night long they were dropping the football. And they still were in this football game. Does that feel more like it's an early season football game for both these teams, Jack? Or does that feel like if this team just does what they're supposed to, they're going to compete on a week in and week out basis?
I still think the Vikings are going to compete. I think it's going to come down to a much more entertaining NFC North than what we were thinking about probably prior to the season kicking off. Right. But I think Philly has rightfully earned themselves. I know it's early in the season. It's 2 games into the season. So it's the same thing with what I'm saying. You got to pump the brakes a little bit on the Vikings side, probably pump the brakes a little bit on the Eagles side as well. But if Jalen Hurts continues to play the way that he played against the Vikings last night, the Eagles are more than likely the favorite to come out of the NFC, in my opinion, especially, I mean, that division is going to be a train wreck, I think, this year with the Carson Wentz-led Commanders, the 2-0 mighty New York Giants, which I don't think anyone was expecting. Now, the Eagles and the Giants are the only teams in the NFC undefeated, I'm pretty sure. And
it's crazy.
If I would have told you that before the season, I think you would have probably put your money against me. But I think we do need to pump the brakes a little bit. It's early on in the season. Like I was saying earlier, the Vikings needed to kind of, I shouldn't say needed. I'm excited to see how they handle the adversity. It happens in the NFL. I saw a tweet. I don't remember who I saw it from, but the Rams last year, they lost 2 games by 17 plus points and they won the Super Bowl. The Packers, who are always the favorite to win the NFC North. That's one thing that I wanted to say today. Do you look across the border into Wisconsin? Do you see panic from them because they started 0-1 against the Vikings? It's one game. They lost by like 35 points to the Saints last year in week 1. They're not panicking. I think
that's the difference between a team that's been there and done that and like come back from that, and a team and a fan base that has been there and watched the wheels fall off. I mean,
that's a fair point, but we're going to learn really quick if the wheels are going to fall off or if they're going to strap them back on uptight and they're
too good.
Rolling.
It's too good of a football team to let the wheels fall off. I'm not going to say they're going to the Super Bowl, but it's too good of a football team to let the wheels fall off.
Yeah, I agree. And I still have a fair amount of confidence that we're going to be talking about this team come December, maybe making a run at the playoffs. I think it's unfair to expect, and not unfair. There's a lot of people that were saying the Vikings, it's a new offensive scheme that if the pieces click, it's a Super Bowl caliber team. That might be true, but you just don't see that with first year head coaches. Kevin O'Connell is still learning the ropes. And I think, like I said, I think this could be in the long run a good thing for this team, depending on which team shows up against the Lions on Sunday.
Right. You'd rather lose a game like this early in the season. One more comment from Joshua, who has been with us since the beginning. Overaction Andy Hurts is solid, but he missed quite a few easy throws last night. That's true too, right?
Yeah, I think that's fair, but I think you can miss more throws when you're putting up 50-plus rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns. I think that
more room for error.
The video that they showed, I didn't remember seeing that. Jalen Hurts squatting 600 pounds in college. That is absolutely insane for a quarterback. Like,
I don't know why.
And that was another thing.
Right.
Cam Bynum. When you're at the goal line like that, just get the guy on the ground. Don't be fancy and go for the football. I think that was, again, they probably would have scored anyways there. I don't necessarily hate the aggressiveness trying to go for the football, but yeah, I agree with that comment. I think there's still room for growth in Hurts's passing game, but we're seeing it across the NFL now where there's these running style quarterbacks that can get away with accuracy issues. I mean, Josh Allen had accuracy issues. I'll put quotes around that coming into the NFL out of Wyoming. Look where he's at now. I don't know if you watched much of that other Monday night game last night, but our old friend Stephon Diggs had a field day against that Tennessee Titan defense.
He sure did, and my fantasy team thanks him for it. So, Jack, we'll wrap it up right there. Thanks for taking some time to reflect on the Vikings' first loss of the season, a 24-7 loss to the Philadelphia Eagles Monday Night Football. They bounce back 5 days from now. It is Sunday football at U.S. Bank Stadium against division rivals, the Detroit Lions. And if you are headed to that game, I would encourage you now to head over to sodastick.com, enter the promo code KFAN and take 15% off some cool purple gear, Minnesota sports inspired gear. I've got the hat on today. I know we've got a bunch of t-shirts. They've got a bunch of cool stuff that you can wear to that Minnesota Vikings game on Sunday against the Detroit Lions. That's sodastick.com, and the promo code is KFAN. Jack, we'll see you maybe Thursday, right? I think we're going to do Thursdays now going forward because we'll get all the info tomorrow from the team, and we'll touch base on Thursday to preview that Lions game. Have a great day, man.
Yeah, you too.
See you later.